So let me ask you this. Are you, right now, maybe scrolling on your phone while you're listening to us, perhaps watching TV out of the corner of your eye, or even making dinner? We all kind of live in this mode, don't we? We convince ourselves we're these productivity superheroes like Iron Man, Running all these complex systems, simultaneously analyzing the bad guys, managing the suit's weapons, flying, all without breaking a sweat. But, well, the science tells a really different story, a much more, maybe humbling one. Cognitive psychology, neuroscience. They suggest that when we try to juggle complex stuff, we're definitely not Iron Man. We're actually closer to maybe an old Windows 95 computer trying to run, I don't know, Photoshop, a huge database, and a virus scan all at the same time. You know what happens next, right? Everything just lags, freezes up, crashes, lots of errors. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really tearing apart the research on multitasking. We're digging into a major literature survey, synthesizing like decades of findings. From the early lab stuff to modern brain scans, our mission here is to figure out precisely how our brains even attempt to juggle tasks. What are the hidden costs, and why, for almost anything complex, this idea of doing things truly simultaneously is, well, it's mostly a myth, a persistent and maybe even expensive one. We're hoping to give you the data, maybe, to feel okay about just focusing on one thing deeply.
Yeah, and I think starting with the terms is crucial. We need to be really clear because the research is overwhelmingly consistent on this. When we try high-level multitasking, performance drops. It's just less efficient than single-task focus. And you can measure this drop pretty clearly across like three main things. Accuracy goes down, speed slows down, and it just eats up way more of your cognitive resources.
Okay, so accuracy, speed, resources. Got it.
The core of the issue really lies in how we use the word multitasking. For the brain, especially when you're talking about tasks needing planning, memory, executive control, think like writing a detailed email while you're really trying to listen in on a conference call. True simultaneity is basically impossible. The brain just doesn't seem to have the parallel tracks for two things that both need that central control room.
Okay, so if we're not actually doing two things at the very same instant, what is happening? Because it sure feels like we are sometimes.
Right, that feeling is strong. But what's happening under the hood is something researchers call task switching.
Task switching.
Yeah, it's like the brain's high-wire act. It's rapidly flicking its focus back and forth, changing the rules it's using, the attention settings between the different things you're trying to do. And it's complex enough that researchers have kind of broken it down into types, which helps us see where the problems, the costs, come from.
Types of switching. Okay, like what?
Well, they usually talk about three main ones in the literature.
Mm.
First, there's concurrent multitasking. That's the attempt to do two complex things literally at the same time, like trying to have a deep phone conversation while balancing your checkbook.
Okay, the attempt. I like that qualifier.
Exactly. Then there's sequential multitasking. This is probably more common. It's just switching between tasks over time, like, checking your email every 5 minutes while you're supposed to be writing a report.
Guilty as charged. And the third.
The third one is huge now, media multitasking, or MMT. This is all about using multiple media streams or devices at once. The classic example, right? Scrolling through Instagram while you're watching a movie on Netflix.
Right, the phone and TV combo. That seems almost universal now. So that distinction between attempting true parallel processing and the reality of just switching back and forth really fast, that's key. How do the scientists actually prove it's switching, though, in a controlled lab setting?
They use a really foundational method. It's called the dual task paradigm. It sounds fancy, but the idea is pretty straightforward.
Okay, break it down.
You get participants, and you have them do two tasks. Let's call them task A and task B at the same time, concurrently. Then you measure how well they do, and you compare that performance, maybe their speed, or how many mistakes they make directly against how well they do when they only have to do task A or only have to do task B.
Ah, okay, so you compare the solo performance to the duo performance.
Exactly. And if the brain could handle both perfectly in parallel, like two separate processors, you wouldn't expect performance to drop when they do both together, right?
Right, performance should stay the same.
But that's almost never what happens with complex tasks. Performance nearly always goes down in the dual task condition. People get slower, they make more errors. And when researchers see that drop, they can infer pretty confidently that those two tasks are fighting over the same limited central cognitive resources. It's like a mathematical proof of the brain's bottleneck.
It's like trying to stream two 4K movies on really slow Wi-Fi. Things are going to buffer and glitch.
Precisely. Or another analogy they sometimes use. It's like trying to drink a full glass of water and sing opera at the exact same moment.
Yeah.
You just can't share the resource in that case, effectively for both complex actions simultaneously.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. That competition, that bottleneck, it leads somewhere specific, right? You mentioned costs earlier.
Yes, it leads directly to maybe the most solid, most quantifiable finding in this whole field, switch costs.
Switch costs. The cognitive tax, like we mentioned, let's really unpack that tax. What exactly is the brain paying when it switches? It's not just time, is it?
Right, it's more than just a delay. Switch costs are the measurable penalties you see: slower reaction times, more errors when you shift from doing task A to doing task B compared to if you just kept doing task A continuously.
Okay.
It's the brain's overhead for managing the switch itself. And the research has actually broken down what that overhead involves. There seem to be two distinct sub-processes happening during that switch.
Two parts to the cost.
First, there's what they call goal shifting. This is like the executive decision. Your brain says, okay, stop trying to achieve the goal of task A and now adopt the goal of task B.
Yeah.
It's the top-level command to change direction.
Makes sense. Setting the new destination.
Second, and this is the part that seems to take up most of the time, is task set reconfiguration. This is more like the physiological loading process.
Loading.
Yeah. The brain has to actively shut down the specific rules, the stimulus response mappings, the priorities it was using for the old task, and then activate a whole new set of rules and parameters for the new task. It's like clearing the cache and loading a new program's instructions.
Wow. Okay, so when the research mentions that specific time cost, like what is that range again?
It's typically cited as being around 250 to 300 milliseconds, somewhere in that quarter to third of a second range.
So for up to a third of a second, every single time I switch, my brain isn't actually doing the task. It's just managing the switch, loading the new instructions.
That's pretty much it. During that brief window, your cognitive resources are tied up purely in task management, not task execution. It's the mandatory loading screen your brain has to run every single time you jump focus.
That's kind of staggering when you think about it cumulatively.
It really is. If you're switching frequently, glance at email, answer a quick chat message, jump back to your document, check a notification on your phone, you're bleeding hundreds of milliseconds every few minutes.
Just gone, wasted on switching.
Exactly. Add that up over an 8-hour workday. That's a significant chunk of time where your brain is just shifting gears, not actually driving forward.
It makes that quick check of a notification seem way more costly than just the second it takes to glance at it. It triggers this whole reconfiguration penalty.
It does. It creates this cognitive ripple effect.
Okay, so we know there's a cost. We know it's about switching, not true parallel processing. Let's go inside the machine. Where in the brain is all this happening? Where's the bottleneck?
Right, so now we look at neuroimaging studies, things like fMRI scans, and they point overwhelmingly to one key area: the prefrontal cortex, or PFC.
The PFC, that's the bit at the very front of the head, right?
Exactly. Right behind your forehead. This area is basically the brain's executive suite. It's responsible for what we call executive functions, things like planning, organizing sequences of actions, making decisions, working memory, and crucially for this discussion, inhibiting irrelevant stuff, ignoring distractions.
The brain's CEO again.
Pretty much. And multitasking success or failure seem to heavily depend on how well the PFC can juggle all these demands. But here's what's fascinating. It's not just the PFC working alone. Any complex cognitive task doesn't just light up one spot. It activates a whole network of brain areas working together. The research suggests maybe 20 to 40 different cortical centers might be involved in any given demanding task.
20 to 40 for one task. Wow.
Yeah, it's a massive collaboration. So when you try to introduce a second complex task, the PFC's job becomes incredibly difficult. It has to somehow manage and coordinate two of these huge, demanding networks simultaneously.
So it's not just managing two programs, it's managing two entire orchestras that both want to play different symphonies at the same time using some of the same musicians.
That's a great way to put it. And whether you can pull it off, your multitasking performance really just comes down to whether the available brain resources, orchestrated by the PFC, can meet the combined demands of both task networks without them stepping on each other's toes, without interference.
Okay, so the PFC is the air traffic controller, trying to manage all these planes wanting the same runway, which inevitably leads to delays and potential conflicts. And this sounds a lot like a theory I've heard of, cognitive load theory.
Precisely. Cognitive load theory is a perfect fit here. It basically explains these multitasking limits by framing it as an issue of, well, limited processing capacity. Our brains have a finite amount of mental bandwidth, a restricted workspace.
Like RAM in a computer.
Very much like RAM, or specifically working memory. Working memory is the part of the system that actively holds and manipulates the information you need right now for the task you're doing. It's your mental scratch pad, your workbench.
Got it. The active processing space.
And when you have to task switch, the cognitive load, the total amount of mental effort required, shoots up. Because now your working memory isn't just holding info for task A, it's also trying to hold the goals for task B. Maybe keep track of where you were in task A, suppress the irrelevant stuff from task A while focusing on B. It gets crowded really fast.
So if working memory is like a backpack, multitasking is like trying to cram 10 textbooks, 3 laptops, and maybe a full set of camping gear into it all at once, the zippers are going to burst.
Exactly. That's cognitive load theory in a nutshell. When working memory gets overloaded like that, efficiency just tanks. You start forgetting things, you process information more slowly, you can't filter out distractions effectively. That's the mechanism behind those accuracy and speed drops we talked about.
Okay, so we've got the effect, performance drop, the mechanism, task switching, and cognitive load, the location, PFC managing networks, taxing working memory. Now, what about the different types of interference? The research has models for why some tasks clash more than others, right?
Yes, the field has developed several theoretical frameworks to explain why resource limits cause interference and why the pattern of interference changes depending on the tasks. There are three main camps generally.
Okay, tell me.
The simplest are the limited capacity models. These basically view cognitive resources as one single general-purpose pool, like a single battery powering everything.
One big tank of mental energy.
Right, so if task A needs 60% of the battery, and task B also needs 60%, you just don't have enough power. Performance has to suffer, or one task fails. It explains basic interference, but it's a bit blunt.
So this explains why trying to, say, read a dense philosophy text while simultaneously trying to follow the complex plot of a Christopher Nolan movie is basically impossible. Both are just draining that single tank too much.
Exactly. They both demand a lot from that central cognitive resource pool. But this model doesn't explain everything. Why can I, for example, drive a car and listen to a podcast pretty easily?
Good point. That feels like multitasking, and it often works okay.
Right. So that leads to the second, more nuanced framework, multiple resource theory. This theory suggests the brain doesn't have just one big resource pool, but several specialized pools.
Specialized pools, like what?
They can be specialized by, say, the input modality visual versus auditory resources, or the stage of processing, are you perceiving something, or are you planning a response, or the output modality, are you responding manually, like typing, or vocally, like talking.
Ah, okay. Different types of brain power for different types of jobs.
Precisely. And the key idea here is that interference is minimal when two tasks tap into different resource pools. Like driving that's mostly visual input, spatial processing, manual output, and listening to a podcast that's auditory input, language processing. They don't clash much.
But they would clash if they needed the same pool.
Exactly. Interference gets really bad when two tasks compete for the same specialized resource. Think about trying to read your email, visual input, language processing, while also trying to watch and understand complex charts being presented on a video call. Also visual input, complex pattern processing.
Even if both seem easy alone, they're fighting for the same visual pipeline.
Right. They create a bottleneck in that specific channel. This theory explains task combinations much better. It's why, maybe a Jedi can use the Force to lift Rock's spatial motor resources while also negotiating a treaty verbal executive resources. Different resource pools.
Oh, okay, I like that. Multiple resource theory. What's the third framework?
The third one is task interference models. This perspective shifts the focus a bit. It's not just about running out of resources, but about the tasks actively conflicting with each other at a neural level.
Conflicting how?
It suggests that the mental representations, the goals, or maybe the specific stimulus response rules for one task can directly interfere with or inhibit the ones needed for the other task.
Like they're sending contradictory signals.
Kind of. Imagine task A requires you to press a button when you see a red light. But task B, which you're trying to do at the same time, requires you to not press the button for a red light.
Okay, yeah, that's going to cause problems.
Your brain's instructions are literally fighting each other. The neural pathways are getting competing signals. This leads to hesitation, errors. The conflict isn't just a lack of energy, it's the internal programming actively messing itself up.
The brain is tripping over its own feet because the rules of the two games are too similar but require opposite actions. Okay, these models help explain the why. Now let's get back to the concrete what. What are the big documented hits to performance that we see consistently when people multitask heavily?
Yeah, beyond just that initial switch cost, the literature points to four major consistent performance decrements associated with multitasking.
Four big ones. Okay, number one.
First, straightforward accuracy decrements.
Whoa.
Quality just goes down. When tasks are done together or switch between frequently, people simply make more mistakes than when they focus on one thing.
Makes sense. Quality suffers. Number two.
Processing speed reductions. Things take longer. Even if you eventually get the answer right, your reaction times slow down significantly. It's a constant drag on your overall efficiency.
Slower and sloppier. Not a great combo. What's number three? This one feels important for, well, just feeling overwhelmed.
It really is. Number three is memory impairments. And this is interesting. Heavy multitaskers don't just show poorer performance on immediate working memory tests.
Like holding things in mind right now.
Right. But they also, critically, seem to have a harder time filtering out irrelevant information. Their executive control, the PFC function, struggles to gate out the noise.
So their mental workspace isn't just overloaded, it's also cluttered with stuff that shouldn't even be there.
Exactly. It leads to more mental clutter, more cognitive entropy. They have trouble distinguishing the signal from the noise, which makes focusing even harder.
Wow. And that leads right into the fourth one, I bet.
It does. The fourth major decrement is attention control deficits. Frequent, chronic multitaskers tend to demonstrate poorer sustained attention. They have more trouble staying focused on a single task for a prolonged period, even when they want to.
They get distracted more easily.
Yes, greater overall distractibility. There's even some evidence suggesting that the constant switching behavior might actually degrade the underlying neural mechanisms that support deep focus. It's like they become behaviorally conditioned to seek out the next interruption.
That's the ultimate irony, isn't it? By trying to master juggling all the balls, we actually weaken our ability to just hold one ball steady.
It certainly looks that way from the research.
And if there's one thing driving this whole field of study today, it's got to be media multitasking. Our digital lives seem almost designed to maximize these costs.
Oh, absolutely. The explosion of smartphones, tablets, laptops, smartwatches, the constant notifications, it's created this environment that's just saturated with opportunities and demands for media multitasking, MMT.
And the research on MMT specifically.
It's pretty stark, honestly. Study after study finds strong links between heavy media multitasking habits and reduced cognitive control, weaker ability to manage attention, resist distraction, and also, notably, poorer academic performance, especially in school settings where you need that deep, uninterrupted thinking.
Okay, so it affects our thinking, our learning. But you mentioned something earlier. It's not just mental, right? There are physical costs, too.
Yes, and this is a really important dimension. When researchers start bringing in biometric measurements, heart rate, skin conductance, stress hormones, they find something quite revealing. Dual task conditions, especially when they involve high stakes, time pressure, or conflicting demands, actually activate the body's stress response systems.
Wait, are you saying that scrolling through Twitter while trying to answer work emails is actually triggering, like a fight or flight response?
In a low-level way, yes. The data often shows a measurable increase in sympathetic nervous system, SNS activity, that's the body's accelerator, the fight or flight system, and a corresponding decrease in parasympathetic activity, which is the rest and digest system, the brakes.
Wow. So my body perceives that constant cognitive juggling as a kind of low-grade emergency.
It seems that way. The cognitive load, the constant need to reconfigure, the potential for errors, your physiology registers that as a stressor, as a demand it needs to gear up for.
That changes things. That feeling of being totally drained and wired at the end of a long day, glued to screens, it's not just mental fatigue.
It's likely not just mental fatigue. It could very well be the cumulative physiological cost of keeping your nervous system in that low-level alert state for hours on end. You're basically running on adrenaline just to manage the cognitive debt of constant switching.
That's huge. It reframes the whole thing from just being about lost productivity to being about chronic low-grade stress baked into our daily digital habits.
And that state of stress, that constant distraction, it actively works against achieving that really desirable state of deep engagement and peak performance people call flow.
Flow state. Getting in the zone. Multitasking kills that.
It seems to be the antithesis of it. Flow, as Csikszentmihalyi defined it, involves deep immersion, losing track of time, feeling challenged but capable.
Yeah, it feels great when it happens.
Right. But the research shows multitasking actively impairs flow experiences. The constant interruptions, the shallow engagement caused by switching. It prevents you from building that necessary deep focus. Interestingly, it also seems to change how people perceive the task itself. Multitasking can make the task feel less challenging in a meaningful way, which then negatively affects how you evaluate your own performance and your sense of accomplishment afterwards.
So you never really get into it deeply and you don't feel as good about it afterwards either.
Pretty much. You're constantly pulling yourself out of the potential zone just as you might be entering it.
So multitasking doesn't just make us slower and more error-prone, it makes the work itself feel less rewarding and more stressful physically and mentally. Okay. We've established the system is flawed, the costs are real and significant, but surely there's variation, right? Are some people just naturally better at handling this chaos? Who are the outliers who can juggle effectively?
Yes, individual differences are definitely a big factor. The research has focused quite a bit on identifying the cognitive abilities that predict who will be better or worse at managing multiple tasks.
And what's the number one predictor?
The single most consistent predictor across a lot of different studies and task types seems to be working memory capacity, or WMC.
Working memory again. So having a bigger mental backpack or workbench.
Exactly. People with higher WMC seem to have a larger cognitive workspace. They can hold and manipulate more information simultaneously. This allows them to better manage the goals and details of two different tasks, which helps mitigate those switch costs. They're less likely to drop information when they switch from task A to task B.
Okay, so WMC is like the core engine size. Is there anything else that helps? Other cognitive skills?
Yeah, a few other things pop up. Spatial manipulation abilities seem relevant, especially when they're combined with high WMC. Also, just general cognitive horsepower metrics, things like scholastic aptitude scores or measures of raw processing speed.
Faster processing helps how?
Well, if you can just process information faster overall, then that unavoidable 250, 300 millisecond switch cost, while still there, represents a smaller proportion of your total processing time. You can execute the reconfiguration step more quickly, leading to better overall efficiency when switching.
Makes sense. Faster processor handles the overhead better. What about personality, though? Does just liking to juggle tasks or being a certain type of person make you better at it?
Personality adds another layer of complexity. Looking at the big five personality traits, the results are sometimes mixed, but a couple of patterns emerge fairly consistently.
Like?
Conscientiousness often comes up as being linked to better multitasking performance, or at least better management of multiple tasks.
Interesting. Why conscientiousness? They're not necessarily faster thinkers, are they?
Not necessarily faster, but people high in conscientiousness tend to be better at self-regulation, organization, planning. They might use smarter strategies to manage their workload. Maybe they batch similar tasks together or schedule focused blocks, minimizing the chaotic, random switching that incurs the most cost.
So they manage the demand better through organization. What about other traits?
On the flip side, neuroticism often shows a positive relationship with the frequency of media multitasking.
More neurotic, more medium multitasking. Why would that be?
The theory is that for individuals higher in neuroticism who might experience more anxiety or negative emotion, task switching, especially to something easy and distracting like social media, can actually become a kind of coping mechanism, an avoidance strategy.
Like an escape hatch. Switching away from the difficult or stressful main task provides temporary relief.
Exactly. It's a way to momentarily dial down the anxiety associated with the primary task, even though it hurts overall productivity.
That's fascinating. Any other personality factors?
Extroversion and openness to experience show more mixed results in the literature. Sometimes openness is linked to better performance, maybe because it relates to cognitive flexibility, but it's less consistent than conscientiousness or neuroticism's linked to frequency. But there's one other personality dimension that's really key here, specifically related to multitasking preference. It's called polychronicity.
Polychronicity. Okay, what's that?
It's not really an ability, it's more of a preference and a belief. It reflects how much an individual prefers to be involved in multiple tasks simultaneously versus focusing on one thing at a time, which would be monochronicity.
So some people just genuinely like having lots of balls in the air.
Yes, they feel more comfortable, maybe more energized, when juggling. And this preference strongly influences their actual behavior, how often they choose to multitask, and maybe even the strategies they develop to cope with it. Though preference doesn't always equal better objective performance, it's a big driver of subjective experience and behavior.
Okay, so preference matters. What about age? Does our ability to handle this stuff change over our lifespan? Is it fixed?
Definitely not fixed. There's a very clear U-shaped developmental trajectory for multitasking ability across the lifespan.
U-shaped, meaning
Meaning performance is generally worst at the two ends of the lifespan in childhood and in older adulthood, and it peaks somewhere in the middle, typically in young adulthood. That's the bottom of the U, the point of optimal performance.
so young adults are generally the best multitaskers.
In terms of incurring the lowest dual task costs, yes, generally. Both children and older adults tend to show significantly greater performance drops when asked to do two things at once.
Why older adults? What makes it harder for them?
For older adults, the costs are usually steepest, especially in tasks that combine cognitive demands with motor demands, what they call cognitive motor dual tasking, like trying to walk a complex path while doing mental arithmetic.
Walking and chewing gum gets harder.
Metaphorically, yes. It's thought to be linked to natural age-related declines in the efficiency and integrity of those prefrontal cortex systems we talked about, the executive control center. The air traffic controller just gets a bit slower and less efficient with age.
Okay. What about kids? You said they're also on the higher cost end of the U.
Generally, yes, especially with purely cognitive switching tasks. Their executive functions are still developing. However, kids sometimes show a more complex pattern.
So?
In some specific situations, particularly involving things like maintaining balance or certain motor skills, studies have occasionally found that children might actually show improved performance on one task when multitasking.
Improved. How does that work?
The idea is that their developing brains might be using different, perhaps less mature, resource allocation strategies. Maybe focusing hard on a cognitive task helps automate a motor task better, or vice versa, in ways that don't happen in adults. It's an area of ongoing research, but it suggests development isn't just a straight line of improvement.
Interesting. Okay, so ability changes with age. What about training? We've heard that media multitasking might make us worse at focusing, but does all that constant switching we do actually train us to be better multitaskers in some ways? Does practice make perfect, even if the practice is scrolling Instagram during meetings?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the research offers a slightly complicated, maybe cautiously optimistic picture.
Okay, give me the cautious optimism.
Well, some studies looking at media multitasking across development, especially during adolescence when the brain is still quite plastic, do find correlations. Higher levels of everyday tech multitasking are sometimes associated with better performance on lab-based multitasking tests.
So the constant juggling might actually have a training effect.
It suggests potential training effects, yes. The brain might be adapting to the demands of the environment. But crucially, this needs to be balanced against the findings about reduced attention control overall.
Right, it's not a simple win.
No, but what's clearer is the effect of deliberate training. Laboratory studies consistently show that focused practice on specific dual task combinations can significantly reduce multitasking interference. People can get better at juggling specific tasks with training.
And do we know how that training works in the brain? Are they growing new pathways?
That's the really interesting part. Neuroimaging studies looking at the effects of training suggest it's not about creating fundamentally new, separate processing pathways for the two tasks.
No. So what is changing?
It seems the improvement comes from increasing the speed and efficiency of information processing within those existing prefrontal networks. The brain learns to manage the switch, to reconfigure the task set more quickly and smoothly. The operating system basically gets optimized to run faster.
So we're not installing a second CPU, we're just tuning up the existing one, optimizing the software through practice.
That seems to be the primary mechanism, yes. Through repetition, the brain streamlines the process of switching between those specific tasks.
And how good can people get with enough training? Is there a limit?
The upper limit appears to be remarkably high, at least for some individuals and some task pairs. The literature actually mentions that some people, after extensive dedicated training, can achieve virtually perfect time-sharing performance.
Perfect, like zero switch cost.
Approaching zero cost for highly practiced specific task combinations. Think of maybe an expert pianist playing complex passages with both hands, or a skilled air traffic controller integrating multiple streams of information. They've trained those specific switching processes to be incredibly fast and efficient.
But it's specific and requires a lot of training.
Extremely specific, highly variable between individuals, and yes, it takes a lot of deliberate practice. It's not a general multitasking superpower they develop.
Okay, this is fascinating. It maps out the limitations, the costs, the individual differences, and the potential for specific improvement. So where does the field go from here? What are the big unanswered questions or challenges researchers are focused on now?
Well, there are definitely some key areas needing more work. One persistent challenge is just methodological consistency.
Absolutely.
Different labs often use slightly different definitions of multitasking and different experimental tasks. This makes it hard to directly compare results across studies and build a really unified picture. Getting more standardized methods would really help accelerate progress.
Makes sense. Standardizing the tests. What else?
A really big push is for greater ecological validity.
Meaning making the lab tests more like real life.
Exactly. Lab studies need tight control. That's their strength. But that control often means using very simple artificial tasks, like pressing buttons in response to shapes on a screen. That might not fully capture the messy complexity of multitasking in the real world.
Right. It's different from a surgeon monitoring vitals while performing surgery, or a teacher managing 25 kids while trying to explain fractions, or even just trying to cook dinner while helping with homework.
Precisely. The real world involves higher stakes, more complex information, constant interruptions, emotional factors. We need research designs that can better simulate and measure performance in these ecologically valid complex scenarios, while still maintaining some experimental control. It's a tough balance.
Balancing control with realism. What about looking longer term?
Yes, that's crucial. We need more longitudinal studies. Most research looks at multitasking effects over short periods, minutes, hours, maybe weeks. We have very little data tracking the same individuals over years or even decades.
Why is that long-term view so important?
Because we need to understand the cumulative effects of chronic multitasking habits. Does that constant low-level stress response from media multitasking eventually take a toll on cardiovascular health? Does the degradation of attention control contribute to long-term cognitive decline or mental health issues like anxiety or depression?
What are the lifelong consequences of living in this constantly switched-on state?
Right. These are huge public health questions, really. And only by following people over long periods can we start to answer them definitively and maybe inform policies around technology use or workplace design.
So the goal is really to connect all these pieces of the lab findings, the real-world behavior, the long-term outcomes.
Absolutely. The ultimate goal is to build more comprehensive theoretical frameworks, models that don't just look at working memory or personality or the task type in isolation, but that can integrate all these factors, cognitive abilities, personality traits, task demands, environmental context, to make better predictions about multitasking performance and well-being in the real world.
A unified theory of juggling, basically.
Sort of. And once we have a better map, we can focus more effectively on intervention studies.
Interventions like,
Well, not just cognitive training to make individuals slightly faster switchers, although that has its place, but perhaps more importantly, interventions focused on modifying the environment.
changing the world around us, not just our brains.
Exactly. How can we design software, apps, workplace communication tools, even educational platforms in ways that discourage constant, costly interruptions and actually support periods of focused work? Shifting the design philosophy from maximizing engagement by interruption to facilitating deep work.
That feels like a really important shift, blaming the user versus fixing the system that encourages the problematic behavior.
It's a critical perspective shift, I think.
Okay, this has been incredibly illuminating. As we wrap up this deep dive, can you distill it down for us? What are the absolute key messages people should take away from all this research?
Sure. If I had to pick 3 core takeaways, they'd be these. First, the myth is real and the cost is precise. Forget the idea of a true simultaneous complex multitasking. It's almost always rapid task switching. And that switching isn't free. It comes with that measurable 250, 300 millisecond cognitive tax that the switch costs every single time. Your brain is paying that price.
Got it. Multitasking is switching, and switching costs time.
Second, it's an executive function problem. Managing multiple tasks heavily relies on your prefrontal cortex and its limited working memory capacity. You can get better with practice, but improvement comes from making that existing system run faster and more efficiently, not by magically creating separate brain highways for each task.
Optimize the CEO and the workbench. Don't expect a whole new factory floor.
Exactly. And third, your brain and body pay the bill. The costs aren't just abstract numbers on a screen. Multitasking leads to real drops in accuracy and speed. But it also imposes physiological costs, activating stress responses, increase in fatigue, and actively undermining your ability to get into those deeply satisfying and productive flow states.
It impacts performance, stress levels, and even job satisfaction.
It really does seem to touch all those aspects.
So, the big picture takeaway from all this literature seems clear. We really need to stop thinking of multitasking as some kind of desirable 21st century skill or a badge of honor for being busy. It's actually a complex cognitive state, usually involving rapid switching, that imposes significant costs, costs that vary based on who you are, what you're doing, and your environment. It's something we need to manage strategically, not aspire to constantly.
Well said. It's about managing the switching, not celebrating it.
The quality of our work, the clarity of our thinking, our memory, maybe even our long term well being, they all seem to suffer when that switching is poorly managed or excessive. Which leaves us with a final, maybe unsettling thought to ponder. If we know that chronic media multitasking, the state many of us live in daily, is constantly triggering low level stress responses and potentially degrading our ability to filter out distractions, what are the real long term societal consequences of raising generations in a world that's perpetually dual tasked, perpetually distracted, perpetually bathed in this low grade sympathetic nervous system activation? And maybe more practically, now that you know about that very real 250, 300 millisecond switch, costs that physical limitation of your own brain, how can we use that knowledge? How can we start to demand and maybe even design for ourselves digital tools and environments that respect that limitation? Environments that encourage focus, deep work, and maybe even a bit of cognitive rest instead of constantly demanding that expensive interruptive switch. That feels like the critical challenge of navigating this hyper-connected age wisely.